All right, let's talk a little bit about the West Coast swing holistically. We're 1 year after the greatest West Coast swing the tour probably has ever had. And now, do you think it needs a change? Do you think there's something that needs to change?
One question that I've had, and I don't want to overreact to the weather being bad, but is the tour getting super unlucky this year, or are they flirting with weather danger too much to where the West Coast swing isn't at the optimal time? I understand then you have to replace it with something else, and there's only so many places you can play in January and February. But I think multiple people have pointed out the Pebble Beach getting washed out. It hasn't happened too often, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities based on where it is in the calendar. So I think that would be my question to you two. Is the West Coast swing situated in the best possible spot? Or if you run a little bit of a risk of some weather delaying rounds, is that such a big problem that it actually should be relocated?
I mean, Andy, it feels like, and I know we're going to touch on Rory's comments in a little bit, but I mean, Australia would be a great place to play golf in January and February, right? I mean, if you just played 3 or
I
4
think
events down that way.
the Southern Hemisphere, it's summer there.
Yep. So, I mean,
To a certain extent, yeah, you can play golf in California this time of year. Is it the best version of golf in California? No. And I think that's kind of the shame of everything is like when you might want to come out here. Like if you were gonna say, hey, I'm gonna plan a trip to San Francisco to play golf in Monterey, when should I go? I would say October. And that's not when golf is, but it could, and it's not when the PGA Tour is going to want to visit. A secondary time would be a couple weeks later. If you just get it into like late March, early April, you just have so much less chance of bad weather. Courses firm up, and I think the thing that is most important here is you push into the like your telecast window changes, where if it's getting dark at 7 p.m. Pacific, you can be broadcasting well into primetime television. And I think that's really the big missed opportunity, is that golf rarely gets into these great time windows. You could do that easier with, obviously Australia. Everybody remembers the President's Cup. That was an incredible watch with the time it was on. It was in the middle of the winter. You have nothing else going on. You turn it on. But I do think the problem with moving it is if you move it, then where do you play in America without during that time of year? It's not that nice in Florida yet. So the only way you can move the West Coast swing to another time is if you replace the West Coast swing with worldwide events such as, Dubai, Australia, South America, South Africa. These are the places that have to be moved in if you want to move the West Coast swing to another time of year.
Do you think that's the right solution? I mean, do you think the tour has a problem, or is it just such a bad run of luck that you'd leave these events in place because it was a fluky one-off type of year?
I think that I would want to go to places when it's the best time to go to places. That would be my general ethos. So with that in mind, I like Shane's idea that he wrote for in the newsletter of why not have the tour, the FedEx Cup playoffs on the West Coast? It would effectively, like if you went Pebble Beach and Riviera leading into, you can move East Lake back. You can keep East Lake where it is. If you went round 1 of the FedEx Cup playoffs at Pebble Beach, round 2 at Riviera, and round 3 at the redone East Lake.
And Andy, you get the week off. Like they always have the week off. So, I mean, any argument about travel or any of that stuff goes out the window because you have that kind of Super Bowl break of 2 weeks in theory, right? So there's no issues. I mean, granted, we all fly West Coast, East Coast a decent amount. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. But if anybody argued that point, you'd say, well, you've got the week anyway. But it's like wrap it up before tennis U.S. Open begins, or you run the Tour Championship into the first week of the U.S. Open on tennis side, right? You could run into the first week if you wanted, but get the hell out before college football starts and make it this incredibly marquee thing where summer's over for a lot of people, travel and vacation's done, high school, schools are getting back in, everybody's kind of back into their routine. And oh, by the way, you're getting primetime golf, to your point, Andy, that could go till 9 p.m. on the West Coast because you're basically back ending on the summer. Like, it just makes too much sense not to at least try it, considering this sport, more than any other sport, changes its format. Like, it changes its format all the time.
And people are going to say, oh, all the history of the West Coast swing, you can't move it. Well, Pebble Beach, the tradition, the format, everything's gone. They changed the whole event. The event does not look at all like the event that Bing Crosby started. And now, Riviera was the LA Open. There's nothing open about Riviera now. It is not an open event. So it's okay at this point. I think, like, if I had my druthers, I'd keep all of them on the West Coast. I think East Lake makes a lot more sense given, like, the setup of the tour. East Lake makes a lot of sense for a designated event. I'd much rather have a designated event the week after Augusta in Atlanta than I would in Harbor Town or in Hilton Head. You know, that you're going to a major metro area. It makes more sense. And I'd love to have Atlanta have like a designated full field event or a big designated event. You still get that. And then you could go Chambers Bay, Pebble, Riv, or any order of those three that you want. That'd be sensational golf TV. And it's August. You don't have June gloom. You got long days. And you got three places that you literally do not have to worry about weather at that time of year.
I wonder if any people who have been listening to Friday podcasts for any number of years are like, well, you guys always throw out like all these ideas. Like, where is the cohesiveness? And I think the reason the tour has had to change so many things, like you've mentioned, Andy, is because nothing has ever like completely worked. And at least in my view, the guiding principle should be play the best venues at the best time of year to play them, right? Like, part of the reason the West Coast swing may not work isn't because any of these golf courses we're saying they stink. It's that they're not being played at the best time of year to play them, and you might run into weather issues, and there's a better opportunity to get them on prime time. Like, these are product-driven decisions, and I think if the PGA Tour leaned into making better product-driven decisions versus some of these other considerations that they throw out, that's probably what the guiding principle should be. So I guess to be focused on something versus throwing around all these ideas, that's the guiding principle, right, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, if you, like, Joseph, like the biggest golf event in the world is, if you break down the Masters, it's the first major championship of the year, but it's also played on one of, if not the best golf course in the world, right? There's a reason that we all get excited about the best
time
at the best time to play at Augusta National, right?
Right. So we saw the fall because everybody was like, "Oh, fall might be better. It might be a better time." Then we saw it and we're like, "No, it's not better."
No, out. We're playing it in April. That's when you play there. Like, why are you not making Riviera, which is the best golf course on the PGA Tour? And if you walk up and down the driving range, like I know you guys did at the Genesis, and you ask these players, what do you think about this week? Almost everybody says it's my favorite course, right? Why wouldn't you conclude your season on a golf course that is the best golf course on the PGA Tour and one that the players say is their favorite venue to play? Now you're kind of meeting minds, right? You've got expectation, you've got hype, you've got buildup, but you've also got a golf course that makes it feel like an Augusta on the PGA Tour, right? If you're playing Riviera for your conclusion, to Andy's point, if you're playing Chambers and you're playing Pebble and you're leading to Riviera, you've already cut the field down, to Andy's point about the LA Open. Now, all of a sudden, these dudes are hyped because they could win the Tour Championship, they could win the FedEx Cup or whatever it's called, and they could also win all that at Riviera. It'd be pretty exciting.
Yeah, no complaints here. I do think, I mean, that's a pie in the sky, dream. I think there are also scenarios where you could get the West Coast swing maybe into like April. Maybe you go there after, but that's also the best time to play golf in the Southeast, right? So you run into that. It's figuring out, I think, like, that's the conundrum of the PGA Tour schedule, but that becomes a lot easier with this designated model where you're getting we're starting to get to two tours in one, right? There's the PGA Tour and the PGB Tour right now. And the more that naturally, I think we're going to get there. It might just take a little bit of time. But when we get to, there's 25 events that all the best players in the world play. And these are them. I think that's when it becomes a lot easier to get there. It's just super hard to move all this stuff around when there's 45 of these things a year.